There's a question most people carry, like a shadow, a quiet, invisible weight. Why do I keep sabotaging myself? Why do I turn away from what I say I want? Why do I run just when I get close? Why do I ruin the very thing I prayed would come? It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're lazy. And it's definitely not because you're broken. Carl Jung didn't just study this question. He lived inside it. He called it the split within the psyche, the part of you that consciously desires wholeness, and the part that unconsciously fears what that wholeness would cost. You say you want love, but the moment someone sees you too clearly, you pull away. You say you want to be seen, but when it happens, you shrink. You long to create, but when inspiration comes, you scroll instead. Jung called this inner war the conflict between the ego and the shadow. The ego wants progress. The shadow wants protection. And when they are not in dialogue, you sabotage yourself not because you want to fail, but because safety has always felt more familiar than success. Let that land. Self-sabotage is not your enemy. It's a language. It's the unconscious trying to tell you, I am scared. I don't feel safe. This is unfamiliar territory. When we try to push past our patterns with force, without awareness, the sabotage gets louder. But if we learn to listen, something changes. Have you ever stopped right in the middle of procrastination and asked yourself, gently, what part of me is afraid to move forward? Try it now. Let the question sit. Because Jung taught, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. Sometimes naming the loop is the beginning of breaking it. Now, let's go deeper. There is a part of you that remembers being punished for being too visible, or too honest, or too emotional. So today, even if no one is punishing you, you keep the pattern alive. You punish yourself. You delay the joy. You minimize the victory. You doubt the love. This is not a flaw. This is how the psyche protects the wound. But what protects can also imprison. And Jung believed what we do not bring into light will rule us in the dark. When you sabotage yourself, you're not weak. You're repeating what once kept you safe. But the question is it...
To understand why you keep sabotaging yourself, we have to go back, not to the mistake, but to the mask. Jung called it the persona, the version of you that learned how to survive, the polite one, the productive one, the strong one. The persona isn't fake, it's functional. It's how you learn to be accepted, to be safe, to belong. But the problem? You started believing that the mask was your face, and everything that didn't fit the mask, your sadness, your anger, your softness, your hunger, got buried. Not erased, just exiled. And in the exile, the shadow was born. The shadow is not evil. It's just everything you felt you couldn't be. So now, every time you get close to real joy, the shadow whispers, you don't deserve this. Every time you try to rest, it says you're lazy. Every time someone gets close, it wonders, what if they see the real you? And so you pull back, you delay, you doubt, you disappear, not because you want to, because the shadow hasn't felt safe to return. This is where we meet Elena. Elena is 36, a teacher, a gentle heart. Everyone says she's kind, reliable, responsible. She listens. She helps. She never asks for anything. But behind the smile, there's a silence. She hasn't painted in years. She doesn't sing anymore. And even in love, she never lets herself be fully seen. Why? Because when she was 7, she learned that being too loud, too sensitive, too honest made people uncomfortable. She was told, don't be so dramatic. Stop crying. You're too much. So she learned to shrink. She got praise for being quiet, approval for being helpful, love for being less. And now, even as an adult, her shadow still carries the fear. If I show up fully, I'll be abandoned. So whenever something joyful emerges, a new relationship, a creative idea, she panics, she pulls back, not because she doesn't want it, but because she was trained to protect herself from her own truth. And here's what Jung would say: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Elena thinks it's bad luck, that every time she gets close to happiness it falls apart. But it's not fate, it's repetition, the inner child still trying to be small to stay loved. If you see a piece of yourself in Elena, name it in the comments, not for sympathy, but as a step toward reclaiming the parts of you that were once silenced. You are not the mask. You are the one behind it. And the shadow, it doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be met with softness, with presence.
There comes a moment on this journey when you realize something quietly radical. You're not here to defeat the shadow. You're here to integrate it. Carl Jung didn't tell us to kill the ego or silence the shadow. He told us to listen, to feel, to become whole. Because what you reject inside yourself will find a way to return through your relationships, through your failures, through the dreams that wake you at 3 a.m. Not to punish you, but to remind you the wound is where the healing wants to begin. Let's go back to Elena. She's tired. Not just from her job, but from constantly managing the gap between who she is and who she thinks she's supposed to be. But one night, she tries something different. She doesn't numb, she doesn't scroll, she just sits. And she asks, what part of me am I trying to hide? She doesn't hear an answer, but she feels something, a flicker, a memory, a wave of sadness she usually avoids, and this time she doesn't run. This is what Jung meant by integration. It's not dramatic, it's not cinematic, it's quiet. It begins the moment you stop resisting your experience and begin witnessing it, noticing when your chest tightens, noticing when your voice gets small, noticing when your shoulders rise in shame. And instead of fighting it, you breathe with it. This is where sabotage begins to soften. Because now the unconscious doesn't need to scream. It's finally being heard. Integration means telling the shadow, I see you. You are no longer exiled. You don't have to sabotage me to get my attention. It's not self-help, it's self-remembrance. It's the moment you stop splitting yourself into good and bad and allow yourself to be whole. Elena begins to draw again. Not for Instagram, not for approval, just because it feels good. She still hears the old voice, you're wasting time, but it's quieter now. And each time she chooses presence over performance, the shadow comes home. If you've ever felt like two people, one who dreams and one who destroys that dream before it starts, comment I see both below. Let this be your turning point, not to get rid of anything, but to bring all of you back into the light.
Carl Jung once said, enantiodromia is the emergence of the unconscious opposite over time. In simple words, what you suppress eventually rises. What you resist will return. What you exile will come home. This is not a curse, it's a design. The psyche, Jung believed, will always seek balance. even if it has to collapse you to get there. That's why your sabotage isn't a failure. It's a turning, a sacred rebellion of the soul against the roles that no longer fit. You think you've lost your way, but maybe you're just being rerouted. Let's come back to Elena. It's been weeks since she started listening. She hasn't had a major breakthrough, no lightning bolt, no big transformation, but something inside feels different. She cries more easily and doesn't apologize for it. She no longer says yes when she means no, and the old habit of sabotage, it still whispers, but now she hears it for what it is. Not truth, not fate, just an echo. You see, once you name the voice, it loses power. And once you stop resisting the fall, you begin to rise in a new way, not as the performer, but as the participant. Not with pressure, but with presence. This is the rhythm of the soul. Collapse, then quiet. Quiet, then clarity. Clarity, then alignment. Jung taught that the real goal is not perfection, but wholeness. If you're somewhere in that quiet right now, not quite where you were, not yet where you're going, write in the comments, "I'm in the in-between and I trust it." You are not behind, you are becoming. And the sabotage you thought was your enemy might have been your first invitation to come home. There is a moment, not loud, not cinematic, when you realize you are no longer fighting yourself. You wake up and something inside feels different. Not perfect, not finished, but still. And that stillness, it's not emptiness, it's sovereignty. It's the quiet power of someone who no longer believes their worth must be earned. Carl Jung believed that the true self does not arrive through striving, but through surrender. Surrender to the truth that you are not your wounds. You are not your patterns. You are not your sabotage. You are the one who is witnessing them, and the one who chooses differently. Let's return to Elena. It's been 3 months now. She's not healed. She still feels fear. The old thoughts still visit, but they no longer run the show. She no longer calls them truth. She calls them history. And slowly, she begins to live from the soul. She paints again, this time with no end goal. She lets people in, a little more each time. And when the old voice returns, "You're not enough," she smiles and says, "I see you, but I choose me." This is the power of awareness, not that you never fall, but that you fall consciously. You feel the sabotage coming, and instead of obeying it, you pause, you breathe. You remember the younger version of you, the one who learned to hide, and you speak to her gently. "It's okay now. You don't have to protect me anymore. I've got this." If you've come to that moment, that first pause before the old loop, write in the comments, "I choose differently." This declaration is not for perfection. It's for presence. And presence, Jung taught, is the beginning of transformation. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, you stop needing the world to approve you. You stop chasing. You start creating. You stop apologizing. You start embodying. Sabotage loses its grip when you step fully into your life, even if you're trembling. Because trembling is still movement, and movement is still life. Carl Jung once said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." And yet we spend most of our lives trying to perfect ourselves, erasing the anger, hiding the fear, suppressing the sadness. We've been taught that if we can just become light enough, clean enough, disciplined enough, then we'll finally deserve peace. But peace doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence, from sitting beside what hurts without rushing to fix it, from letting the ache speak before you shut it down. You are not meant to be a masterpiece. You are meant to be real. Elena used to see her sensitivity as a flaw. She hated how easily she cried, how deep she felt things, how she could never shake it off like others. But one day, instead of pushing it down, she let it come up. And in that moment, she didn't feel weak. She felt whole. Because the parts you exile, they don't vanish. They wait. And when you finally welcome them, you stop splitting yourself in two. If you've spent too long trying to fix yourself, comment, "I choose wholeness." Let this be your invitation to stop editing your essence. You don't need to be lighter. You need to be truer. That's the beginning of real peace.
Carl Jung believed that the wound is not just a place of pain. It's the doorway to transformation. We spend so much time running from our wounds. We distract, numb, scroll, strive. We try to outperform our sadness, outwork our grief, outtalk our anger. But none of it goes away. Because the wound is not waiting to be silenced. It's waiting to be heard. Elena had spent most of her adult life being agreeable. She avoided conflict like it was fire. Always the peacemaker, always the one who understood. But understanding had become her armor. She was understanding everyone except herself. Her silence was not peace. It was fear. Fear that if she spoke honestly, she would be rejected, labeled difficult, or worse, left. And so she self-sabotaged, not in grand ways, in subtle daily betrayals of herself. She said yes when she meant no. She smiled when she felt grief. She apologized for her truth. But one day, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't pretty. It was honest. Someone crossed a boundary, and instead of swallowing it, she spoke. "I'm not okay with that," she said. Her voice cracked, her body shook, but she didn't back down. And after, there was no applause, no reassurance, just silence. But in that silence, she felt relief. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Jung called this process shadow integration. It's when the hidden parts of you are no longer left behind. It's not about becoming fearless. It's about acting with fear beside you and choosing truth anyway. If you've betrayed yourself for belonging, comment, "No more shrinking." Because shrinking doesn't protect you. It disconnects you. The wound you carry, that deep ache you've tried to bury, is not a flaw. It's a doorway. Through it is your power, your wisdom, your voice. The work is not to erase it, but to walk with it. And when you do, you no longer have to sabotage yourself to feel safe. You build safety inside, one boundary, one breath, one brave word at a time.
You keep telling yourself that you need to get back to the old you, back to being driven, organized, certain. But what if the old you was never the real you? What if the burnout wasn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough? Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The unconscious is always speaking, not in loud commands, but in resistance, in exhaustion, in the stillness that terrifies you. Elena used to be proud of how on top of everything she was. Every moment was scheduled, every emotion was filtered, every answer was polished. She wasn't lying to others, but she was editing herself. She had become so good at being the version that worked that she forgot what it felt like to simply be. And then she couldn't keep up anymore. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. At first she called it burnout, then laziness, then maybe depression. But eventually she realized something deeper was happening. Her soul had grown tired of pretending. If you've ever collapsed under the weight of being high-functioning, write in the comments, "I can't perform my way into peace." Because that collapse, that's not the end. It's the body's revolt against a self that never truly fit. Jung called this enantiodromia, the psyche's swing back toward balance after too much time in one extreme. If you've lived your whole life striving, there will come a moment where the soul refuses to move another inch without truth. That's not dysfunction, that's design. The moment you stop trying to get back on track and start asking, what if this is the track? Everything shifts. You realize you're not falling behind. You're waking up from performance, waking up from pressure, waking up from the myth that your worth is earned through exhaustion. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the slow becoming of your true self, the one hidden beneath all the roles you played to survive. Elena doesn't hustle like she used to, but she's never felt more alive. She makes space for silence now, for wandering thoughts, for unfinished answers. She no longer apologizes for needing rest. She no longer defines success by productivity. She no longer tries to keep up with a life she didn't choose. And the irony? Now people say she glows, not because she's doing more, but because she's finally being. If something inside you has grown quiet lately, if the old engine has stopped and the new one hasn't started yet, say, "I trust the in-between," because in the in-between, you are shedding what no longer fits, and what remains is real. You begin choosing alignment over achievement. You begin saying yes only when your whole being agrees. You begin listening inward before you act outward. This is not regression. This is resurrection. The you've been missing was never out there. They were always here, waiting behind the noise, behind the pleasing, behind the chase, waiting to be lived. So pause, not because you're lost, but because you're arriving right on time.